you wanted the best, you've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. It's Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Let's let the Iron Lady sing it out for us. Ring it out for 16 years and over 2,000 episodes. We will bring you the Chris Voss Show. All the brightest people, the CEOs, the billionaires, the White House presidential advisors, the Pulitzer Prize winners, all the most brightest folks in the world sharing with you their knowledge and their insight and everything else. Today, we have another amazing young man on the show with us today. His new book was out January 24th, 2023, called Prejudice, Racism, and Tribalism, a Primer for White People. Anthony M. D'Agostino is a doctor who's on the show with us to talk to about his book, his insights, and of course how we can learn a lot more about some of these issues that are plaguing our universe, etc., etc. With Anthony, he has 5 decades as a practicing psychiatrist studying the various iterations of prejudice, racism, and tribalism all Americans encounter day to day. His book, A Primer for White People, is an attempt to look frankly at today's current racial and political divides from the perspective of a traditionally right-of-center white person. This is not an academic study, as he's not an academic person, but he does wonder why there's so much talk about book banning, revisionist history, elevating the AR-15 as a symbol of American freedom, and white Americans feel they're under some kind of assault and are scared unnecessarily by talk of critical race theory and great replacement theory, and they're offended by talk of white privilege and cancel culture. So it's time to take a look at these ideas. Instead of running around scared, let's take a look at them and talk to them with Anthony. Anthony, Doc, how are you on the show?
How are you?
I'm excellent.
So shall I begin with how I decided to write this book, or what?
Sure. Let's start off with your .coms. We want people to know the plugs so they can go look you up and stuff on the interwebs.
Okay. It's Anthony D'Agostino, DAGOSTINOMD.com. I don't think it's up and running at the moment, but it should be by the end of the week.
Okay.
I think we're at the end of the week. So
there you go. Well, it should be close then. That'll be on the Chris Voss Show for the link. Give us a 30,000 overview. What's inside your book?
The book's about, it's an examination of a lot of different things that I think we're concerned about these days. We examine issues like, why are we banning books? I mean, I'm kind of an old person. Thank you for saying I'm a young man, but I've been around for more than 80 years, and I'm sort of wondering why we're banning all these books now, where, in the previous 80 years of my life, I hadn't noticed that. I also am concerned about why we're afraid of real American history. Why are people, banning, talk of things like slavery, which was, part of our past. And why has the AR-15 become the symbol of American freedom? It seems like, the symbol of America now becomes kind of a John Rambo, figure with a gun in his hand. And, I was born and raised in the city of Chicago, and I lived there for the first 26 years of my life, and I never saw fit to carry a gun for some reason. And now suddenly, I guess I'm supposed to. So these questions, concern me. Also, in 2016, Donald Trump seems to have been a very popular figure in our culture. And so I decided, why is this happening at this point? Why did we elect a person who had no previous experience in politics and didn't seem to actually care a lot about politics, and yet he's become a very popular figure? I was interviewing a patient of mine, at about the time, 2015, 2016, and I said, and she was very, very thrilled by him, and I said, why are you so enamored with this person? And she says, he's for us. And I said, what do you mean he's for us? He's for the white people. I said, okay. I thought that was pretty good. And when he actually got elected, I thought, And he also made the comment at the time that, he could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and not lose any support. And it turns out that he was actually right. So he could do pretty much anything he wanted and not really lose support, even, attempt to overthrow an election. So I thought, gee, what comes to me, with all of this? And three words sort of popped into my mind for some reason. The first was prejudice. The second was racism, and the third was tribalism.
Yeah.
So these are sort of variations on a theme, and I thought, I think we ought to really look into this. And it made me also think that, us white folks, we need kind of a primer or a reminder of, things that might everything that's happening today has happened in the past, in the United States. Nothing is really new, but I thought, maybe we need to sort of go over our history a little bit and examine, the meanings of these various words. So, for example, I took a look at, words, and one of the things I'll examine in the book are different words, like, for example, the N word. What's the purpose, or why is it forbidden that white people should say the N word? And again, what I come up with is that, that word has been used as a way of subjugating, people over the years, and apparently it's still pretty good at doing that. So it's still fairly popular. The other word I look at is the word racist, which I call the R word. Now, a racist is, it doesn't have a very positive connotation in general, but if you look at the actual meaning of the word, which I try to do, I think it might be inappropriate. I think we maybe use it sort of inappropriately. And I think the way we use it culturally right now is we're saying that person is a racist. What they mean is he has prejudices about somebody of a different race. And I don't really, I don't really think that's a good use of the word. We should use it somewhat differently. And for example, if you ask I try to address the question of, are all white people racist? And I come to the conclusion that no, they're really not, but that depends on how we define that particular word. If we define the word as any person who has prejudices about people of another race, then maybe all of us white folks are racist, but I don't think that's an appropriate use of that word. I think the word should have more of a neutral quality to it rather than as a slur.
Yeah. And, because so let me ask you this: Does if racist is anyone with a prejudice, one thing that we do in our brains, and I'm not trying to make an excuse for racism or prejudicism, but this is an honest question from a psychology standpoint. But if we all have prejudice, we all judge each other, whether we want to admit it or not. Women judge each other on what they wear, men judge each other on who's top of the tribal hierarchy of, who's got more money or more things,
Exactly.
We Forbes judges who their top richest people are. We judge people as to whether or not we want to associate with them. And I'm not just talking in skin color. I mean, I judge people on the quality of their character. I judge people on maybe they have some really dumb ideas that I don't like, and so in a way, isn't that all prejudice in some way, shape, or form?
Exactly. I mean, if you use the definition of anybody who has prejudices about someone of a different race, we'll use race at the moment, but it could be prejudices about a lot of different things. I think it's 2 points in the book are that there are two things that are inborn in human beings. One is prejudice. We all have them in one way or another. And the other is tribalism. We're born with, I think, a genetic propensity to feel safe around people that are like us. So but those are, I think, normal things in normal human beings. So Nobody is free of prejudice. Now, you could say that Abraham Lincoln was a racist if you're going to use the definition of anybody who has prejudices about black people. Then we could probably say Abraham Lincoln was a racist because he probably did have some prejudices about black people. He grew up, in the 1820s and 30s and 40s in the United States. And, I don't know that when we're growing up, we question everything that we learn and just take most things for granted. And in the book, I use the example of, when I went to school, I went to, grade school, high school, and undergraduate college. These were all in Catholic institutions, and I went to Catholic schools growing up. My wife is Lutheran, and she went to Lutheran schools while she was growing up. So I'm being told that Martin Luther is she's being told that Martin Luther is a great person and a visionary and a really important person. I'm being told that he's a heretic. So obviously,
both sides of that
we all grow up with a certain amount of prejudice. So we're not going to free ourselves entirely of prejudice. If we say that a person's racist because they have prejudices, we all do. We grow up in a certain environment, and we, actually part of socialization is teaching people, the mores and traditions of your particular group. In the United States, we have what's called a multicultural society. So we're going to have a certain amount of clashing of those things. And I just use the example of Catholicism versus Lutheranism as just one example of many that we encounter and we have to deal with, as we grow up. That's what I talk about in the book, and that's what I think in many ways we should be talking about, at this particular point in history. The other issue in the book is that I think, my argument is that prejudice, racism, and tribalism is actually kind of profitable depending on how you're using these kinds of things. And, for example, if you have a person who, let's say he's 30 years old, white person with diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and he's married, he has 2 children, if we can exploit his prejudices, it's going to be very profitable for some people. So if this person, dislikes black people, dislikes Mexicans, queers, and liberals because the liberals are going to take his guns away, then if you can exploit that, that can be a fairly profitable enterprise because he's going to vote for the guy who, dislikes blacks, Mexicans, queers, and liberals because they're going to take their guns away. And if you're going to elect that particular person, that person's going to go to, go to the Congress and, vote for, very low taxes on billionaires, if any. His insulin is still going to be $700 a month because, he's not doing anything about that. He's going to vote for the guy who's against Obamacare, which, by the way, allows whatever insurance he might have to actually pay for the insulin, which he absolutely needs to live. And they're going to work against him in terms of, no unions. And when his kids grow up, he's not going to get any college support. So if he makes, say, $45,000 a year, he's going to be in perpetual credit card debt. He's going to, the drug companies are going to do whatever they please. The insurance companies, if without Obamacare, would still be able to say to him, sorry, you're a lifelong diabetic. We might lose money caring for you, so we don't have to insure you anymore. So if you can get him to vote against his interest, that's a source of power.
That's
so look at that.
Yeah. And you talk about in the book then, politicians have been using that as a profitable source for power. I think power brokers at the top of any society that try to be the oligarchs that try and shape society in the way that they feel. Certainly, white power, white voting power is a big deal in this country for certain parties. But you bring up a great point as to why I've always wondered, why do people vote against their best interests? But you're right. This has been going on since the beginning of man, where a politician goes, that stranger guy over there that looks kind of different and stuff, he's coming for you. You should fear him, and I will protect you from that man. And they're
Right.
like, well, he looks fine to me, but you say he's scary, so maybe we should believe you and then vote against our own best interests, which is kind of funny and ironic.
So it sort of puzzles me why that person would vote for people who's going to vote against everything that he needs in order to survive in life.
Yeah.
But that's a fact of life.
Did you hope that your book is targeted towards white people in kind of understanding why these issues are at the forefront of our politics, of our society, of our dialogue that we're having? And
I think we need to talk about some of those things, and that's what I try to do in the book in as frank a way as I can.
There you go. Well, I mean, the only way to address the problem of racism and prejudice and stuff is to take a hard look at it and go, hey, are there things, we've had a lot of DEI people on the show. We've had a lot of people that we've talked about the subject of racism and prejudice and the arc of history over the, 400 years of this republic, technically.
Right. I try to talk about, what racism is and what it isn't. Now, when the former governor of Virginia was outed because I guess he graduated from medical school, and while in medical school he was on blackface, and so there was a lot of talk, on like public radio and other places about racism. And so I was listening to public radio one day, and the interviewer was inviting people to call in to talk about their victimization under how you were racially victimized. No black people called in. I was listening, although maybe somebody did when I wasn't listening. But one woman called in and said that she was a person her father was of Iranian background and her mother was of Argentine background. And since it was radio, I really couldn't see what this person is, but she said that she passed for white. And I thought to myself, she passed for white? I mean, what is she? I wish I could see this woman. So she said she was in a bar and somebody said to her, oh, you might not want to live in this neighborhood or in that neighborhood, or you might want to not go to that bar because there are a lot of Hispanic people that go to that bar, or some such comment like that. And she called that in as a victim of racism. That person was not a victim of racism. The patient had her feelings hurt, and she, perhaps, I couldn't see her, but, I've been in practice for over 50 years. I'm retired now, but for, 55 years of practice, I practiced with a lot of doctors who were from Iran or from Argentina. Now, 60% of the population of Argentina is of Italian background, which is my background. And the others, the black population of Argentina is under 1%. Even the Native American or Native Indian population is probably under 4%, if that. Mm-hmm. So the rest are mostly Europeans of European ancestry. Mm-hmm. And Iran, a lot of my relatives come from a place called Armenia, which is right next to a place called Iran. And, the Iranian, I practiced with a lot of Iranian doctors, and it never sort of dawned on me that they're sort of a different race. They're a different culture, clearly. And the people on one side of the border, they're all Muslims in Iran, and the people on the other side of the border in Armenia, they're all Christians. So we're saying that the Christians are white people and the Iranians are Muslims, therefore they're not. Really confusing sort of thing. So I couldn't see what this woman was up to, but she in no way was a victim of racism. She was a victim of bad manners. She was a victim of, somebody hurt her feelings, but that's not being a victim of racism. You cannot just have your feelings hurt and be a victim.
There's a lot of people doing that these days. That's
yes. There are a lot of people doing that. And in the book, I also say that I was born and raised in Chicago, which is the home of the Nation of Islam. And if you know much about, the black Muslims, they have, at least in the past, they used to have this view that all white people were actually devils, and that, they're not really humans. They're just sort of devils. And they have a negative feeling. But I lived in Chicago most of my life, my early life, and I never felt victimized by the fact that the Nation of Islam didn't like me, because they didn't do anything to me. They didn't cause me any difficulty. So if somebody if somebody called me a bad name, which happens a lot when you grow up in the city, people call you bad names. That's not being victimized. That's just having your feelings hurt. So I try to distinguish in the book between being victimized by actual racism and having your feelings hurt, which are not the same. But you have to read the book in order to understand what I mean.
There you go. And of course, the book will help stuff. So did you deal with a lot of this in your practice over 50 years as a psychiatrist?
I've seen people of every race, and I think, my experience as a psychiatrist is that we're all awfully alike in our, inner life and in the way and the things that motivate us and the way we operate. So it's very difficult to say that somehow, one group is better than the other based on what I experience, with them. I think also most people, Black, white, Asian, they tend to be conservative in the sense that they don't like a lot of change. They don't like a lot of surprises in their life. They don't like, they're not radical in their thinking process as a rule. They just want things to be, they just want to live. They're just trying to get through life like most of us. And there really is no other agenda going on here. I've never been able to figure out, how all these people differ from one another, because in reality, they don't. I mean, we're genetically extremely similar to one another. The only thing that makes us different, the color of our skin or, the character of our facial structure or things like that. These are all just minor variations in the genes that control these things. And I mean, there was a time, back in the 19th century, especially, where, Black people, white people, Asians were all different kinds of evolution. We all have a common origin. We have a common origin with worms. And, we all have this 4-base, structure in our DNA that does not vary, whether you're a worm, whether you're a human being, whether you're a tree, or whether you're a rhinoceros. So there's an awful lot of similarity in people. And I think that maybe the only thing I can offer as a psychiatrist is that I maybe see that more often than other people.
Mm-hmm. Most definitely. There's a lot of issues people have, and they're unresolved. And do you think? Let me ask you this. This is a conversation we've had on the show. Do you believe that prejudice and racism is taught by parents and influenced by sometimes by?
To some extent. To some extent, yes. But. It's like I use the example with my wife. She was taught that Luther was a great guy, and I was taught that Luther was a heretic. So you're going to get different views. Part of maturing is being able to step up beyond that. Now, there are some people, that just can't get beyond that, and you're not going to get beyond that. I think racism, the way I've defined it in the book, and which I think is a better way of defining it, not just prejudice, because we're all prejudiced. I have prejudices about Black people. I have prejudices about everybody who's different than I am.
I'm prejudiced against broccoli.
You're right. So there's all kinds of, we live with it. We're there, However, when your prejudices are exploited, either politically or financially, or even socially, you're just, you're going to have a bad time, especially in America, where, we have multicultural, whether we like it or not. We're here. And I see in some of the local political campaigns, there are going to be these mass deportations of all the people we don't like. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Yeah. In the 1840s and 1850s, we had something called the Know Nothing Party. And the Know Nothing Party was against all immigrants and all Catholics.
Wow.
In the 1840s, who were the Catholics here? The Irish, and they didn't like these folks, and then at the turn of the century, when my grandparents were coming here, they were against these people. In fact, there was a book published called The Passing of the Great Race, which was a book that described how the Anglo-Saxons of the United States should not be interbreeding with these, new folks like, the Polish people or the Italians or...
But your cousin's okay, I guess.
It was sort of like, you guys, you're going to breed with these people and you're going to poison, poison the genetic pool. Now, this was a popular book, back in the very early 1900s. And in 1924, we ended up passing this absolutely rigid immigration law that said, no more, we're not going to take any more Europeans here, except the Europeans that don't want to come here. Those are the ones we will welcome, and the Europeans that want to come here, we won't take. So we've been through this before. I just thought, as a primer, let's review some of our history and look at some of our attitudes and see if we've changed any. Maybe we haven't.
I don't. It seems like it seems like there's an ebb and tide to it, doesn't there?
There is.
Like, it seems like, before Donald Trump, came in the escalator and made that humongously racist comment about Mexicans coming across the border, and they're sending their worst people, is what he was quoted as saying, from, of course, the worst person in the world. And it reignited this whole thing that I thought we'd resolve with racism under Obama. I think a lot of white people, and I know a lot of people like me, were like, okay, we've come a long way. We've achieved a lot of things. We have a black president now that can show there's no ceiling or glass ceiling, or there's a pathway there, and then to see the racism come back, and I had no idea. I remember when Donald Trump was elected, I sat there just going, what is going on? Our country's going back to this racist sort of 1940s, 50s sort of attitude. And I remember taking a look at, white nationalism and what it was. I didn't understand where that it came from. Turns out it was just a rebranded Ku Klux Klan. But to see that take hold in a grasp of our country's narrative, and then, of course, you had the Jews Won't Replace Us folks that showed up in Charlottesville, and to see all that, I just was in shock. I was like, I thought we resolved all of this, or at least we made good inroads, but we're clawing a seed in the clawback and drag back to some time where we were much more or less enlightened and dumber. It was insane.
I wrote the book because white folks today, or a lot of, not all, but many white people today feel that they're being somehow persecuted in the world. And I think, Trump fosters that belief that we're somehow being persecuted and that, only he can save us. But what he's saying, in effect, is, I will save white supremacy for you if you elect me. Yeah. And, I don't think, even if we elect him, I don't think he's going to be able to do it. So there are these kinds of issues that roll around, and I thought, let's try talking about them again. I'll do it in a kind of simplistic way. I'm not really an academic, really. Let's talk about it in a kind of common sense way and see if we can come to any kind of conclusions. I mean, I'm a white person, and I don't feel like I'm being eclipsed or pushed aside because other people, blacks and Asians, do well. That's fine. I think that strengthens the country, and that doesn't depreciate me. But I think a lot of white folks feel that if somebody else does better, we're going to do worse. And I don't get it. But anyway, I wrote a book to discuss those issues.
There you go. And so as we go out, what do you hope people come away with when they read the book? What do you hope you achieve? The people, the feedback that I've been getting from people who have read the book, and which is kind of what I was hoping for, was, I didn't think about things in that way. I feel less threatened in the world. There's a section in the book where I
one reviewer was criticizing me because I said it's better to be white than black. And I didn't quite say that, but what I said was, I was quoting from another book, that when you look at your positioning in the world, is it better to be male than female?
Yeah.
Is it better to be rich than poor? Is it better to be able-bodied than disabled? Is it better to be black than white? And what I said was, I was quoting from this other person, I said, for most of my life, I would have to agree with all of that. I mean, because that's the way I thought.
Mm-hmm.
I'd rather be white than black. Yeah, I'd rather be male than female. Yeah, I'd rather be rich than poor. Yeah, I'd rather be, she was setting up these binaries. And so I was simply saying, and, one of the critics said that it was a good book, but he said it's better to be white than black. So
it's amazing what people pick up on, especially when you're hoping that they learn something from it. And
right, but most of the feedback has been pretty positive.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, I think it was even Chris Rock said in one of his stand-up things, super funny Chris Rock. He said, most of you white people wouldn't trade places with me because I'm black, and I'm a millionaire. And I think it was from Bigger, Blacker, Better. I think I can't remember the name of it, but yeah, he's so funny and he has so much great material. So there you go. So as we go out, I guess the message is try not to be so darn racist and prejudiced and tribalistic people. Is that a good summation? Maybe.
Yeah. Think about some of the things you assume that might not be true, and you might want to just. I mean, learning real American history is not offensive.
Mm-hmm. It's not. It's the one thing this is my quote. The one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history, and thereby we go round and round. And until we face the ugly truth and face some of the different issues that we have, we can't repair them. And that's the fallacy of our situation. So there you go.
Well, we're going to have to find a way to deal with this, and I think we will ultimately.
I would hope so. I would hope that in the end, for sadly all the damage it has to cause to learn this lesson. Like I said, man does not learn well from his history, but I'm hoping that if we survive the signposts, we'll be able to look back on a day someday with Donald Trump and realize how ugly that was, and how that was the last clawback of a very ugly generation. Yeah,
that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, and it will be a signpost. People will look back and be like, yeah, there was that time, and that was the marker, that was the final straw that broke people's back, that went, God, we really have some issues we need to deal with. So there you go. Anthony, thank you very much for coming to the show. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for my audience for tuning in. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, LinkedIn.com/Chris Voss, and all this crazy place on the internet. Order up where refined books are sold. Understand what's going on. Remember, the one thing man can learn from his history is that man never learns from his history. So let's learn some stuff, folks. Order up where refined books are sold. The book is called Prejudice, Racism, and Tribalism, a primer for white people. And probably, a lot of different other people should read that, because there's all sorts of different levels of prejudice and racism, even in different segments of other cultures and race. So we all need to knock it off and just learn to get along, as a man once said that was a good man. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you next time.